Thank you for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. My guest for this episode is Julie Smith from IDSA Alliance. So, Julie, if you want to give some background on yourself and a little bit about the organization.
Yeah, sure. Tony, thanks for having me. So I'm the executive director of the Identity Defined Security Alliance. We're an organization that's been around since 2019 as a standalone not-for-profit. So our mission is to educate security professionals about the importance of securing digital identities and then providing advice, sort of best practices, frameworks, education around how to prevent identity-related attacks. We have 30 or so vendor members, and we've also have a customer advisory board of about 10 security leaders and identity executives who are advocates for our organization. They do a lot of speaking for us, writing for us, make sure that we are doing the right things for the practitioner community. So I guess that's it at a high level.
Okay. Well, so before we go into kind of some other stuff about identity in general, and I have some thoughts there. I want to make sure that we kind of start with that you have coming up like next week, this Identity Management Day. So I guess give some background on that. Like what's that about, and what people attend that.
Yeah, sure. So Identity Management Day, this is actually the second year. Last year was the first year, and we partnered with the National Cybersecurity Alliance to put on this day. It's really a day of awareness to highlight the importance of securing digital identities, and it's an important topic regardless of whether you're a large enterprise or you're an individual concerned about doing business online securely, whether it's transacting your daily life or as an employee or a partner within an organization. So it's really just about highlighting the importance of securing digital identities. During the day, we'll have it, and it's April 12th, by the way, Tuesday, April 12th. During the day, we'll have a virtual conference. So that's new this year. Last year, we had a session where we talked about the day. We announced awards. And we also had a panel, and this year we've turned it into a virtual conference. So we've got 5 sessions, 20 speakers. We have 12 exhibitors who will be a part of our expo, so organizations that sell solutions into this space. But really, it's about a vendor-neutral thought leadership type of event where people can come and learn about this particular topic. We're going to hit on things like why are we having identity-related attacks today, and how can you prevent them? We'll talk a little bit about SMBs and how SMBs are not immune from this particular issue. And in fact, there's in the last couple of years, there have been pretty significant and impactful breaches that have occurred within organizations that were considered SMB in terms of size, but yet the result of those attacks were pretty impactful. We'll talk about zero trust. We'll talk about what's missing in identity, and lastly, we'll talk about the future of identity. So it's going to be an awesome day in terms of the virtual conference, and then the other part of it is awareness. So sharing best practices and resources amongst the community, and so hopefully, people will join in and share their tips and best practices and advice via social using hashtags IDMGMT Day 2022 and Be Identity Smart. So, we're pretty excited about what's happening on April 12th, and we hope to rally the community to put a highlight and a focus on this particular topic. I mean, it is a once a year type of event, but organizations really need to be paying attention to protecting their identities throughout the year.
Agreed. To me, identity sort of like one of the buzzwords in recent years that it seems like every single vendor talks about is visibility. Everyone's like, well, comprehensive visibility, and they're like every single company has some tagline somewhere on their website that says you can't protect what you can't see, and all that, which is true. And that's a whole separate conversation, which I've had in previous podcasts, and I've actually done a presentation on, which is when it comes to sort of tech and cybersecurity buzzwords. Like on the one hand, it's a buzzword and it's kind of marketing fluff, but there's an ounce of truth to it, which is why it caught on. In this case, so visibility, obviously that is important. Identity, I think, is similar. Like everyone talks about it, and it is one of those just kind of fundamental things. Like, I had noted many years ago that line of everyone in here is safe and we're good, and the whole idea of the perimeter and sort of the inside and the outside and us versus them. I said, well, that's all gone, because all of the attacks at the point of attack are a legitimate user,
right?
In most cases, like however they got those credentials. If you're busy looking for some stranger, in a hoodie from outside attacking your network, you're not going to find that. What you're going to find is Julie is doing something suspicious, and why is that? And so from an organization's perspective, identity it becomes very important. It's like, okay, well, I need a way to more strongly validate that this thing that's connecting whoever or whatever it is actually Julie, is actually has a legitimate reason to be connected. And one other kind of point on that, or note on that, is that I also think now identity is so much bigger. Like, before it was really just, okay, I've got 100 users, so I've got 100 usernames and passwords. I need to, maybe do some two-factor authentication and deal with that. But now we're talking about, cloud applications and SaaS applications and server-to-server communications, and everything has an identity. All of these millions and billions of things that are all interconnected all need to be able to verify the identity of what it is they're connecting to.
Yeah, for sure. And if we go back to why did Identity Management Day hit our radar, and why did we decide to host it? So 61%, according to the Verizon Data Breach Incident Report, 61% of hacking-related breaches are related to an identity. And in our research, which is one of the things that we do as the IDSA, 79% of organizations have experienced an identity-related attack in the last 2 years. So, it's prevalent. And to your point, there's sort of a saying, hackers, they don't need to really hack you. They just have to log in. So somehow, to your point, they've gotten a valid set of credentials, and they're using those credentials to get access to your sensitive data, to your infrastructure, whatever the case might be. And one of the things that we have found through our research is that the number of identities has exploded over the last 5 years, right? So to your point, it's the number of identities that organizations are having to manage, but it's also the types of identities. So you also mentioned service accounts, and machine identities has really exploded. So it's human identities in the form of employees, customers, maybe consumers if they're in a B2C environment, partners, third-party contractors or service providers that they engage with, but then also these machine identities. So I think it's not just the vast number that organizations are having to deal with, but I think it's the different types as well, and the ownership of those identities, and who handles and sort of advises on access that those identities have. So a lot of what's come up in the last couple of years, and I think is around least privilege, right? So giving those identities the least amount of access to do their job effectively. And then also zero trust. And zero trust, I think, has been considered more of a network type of approach, but it's really about the identity, and don't trust, but consistently verify that identity as well. And I know you had Den Jones on recently, and he is a member of our customer advisory board, and from his days at Cisco and Adobe, and a big proponent of, identity is the core component of zero trust, and organizations really need to think of it from that perspective.
Yeah. So like actually just before you mentioned Den, who, yeah, I've had him on here a couple times over the years, talking about zero trust. But as you were talking, that was literally where I was going to go next, was like, the identity is very integral to zero trust, and like a lot of the things you just talked about from an identity perspective are exactly the kind of things that zero trust is sort of trying to solve for.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do as the Identity Defined Security Alliance, and you can go to our website, which is idsalliance.org, and find there's some case studies around organizations, Adobe being one, Logarithm being another, not as a security company but as an end user company, about how they've approached zero trust and the role of identity in their zero trust implementations. So we, in addition to research, which I talk about, we come together in the form of technical working groups, and those technical working groups consist of vendors who are competitors and practitioners. And so, I want to stress, I guess, the point, and you and I talked a little bit about as we were warming up for this, the vendor neutrality of what the IDSA does. So the content that we put out is very vendor neutral. We're not trying to sell anything. We're trying to educate. And so we have a framework that consists of about 19 security outcomes, is what we call them, which are things that organizations should be focused on when they're thinking about their security strategy, specifically as it relates to protecting identities. So, there's lots of, there's blogs that talk about identity in the different contexts that we've hit on: machine identity, zero trust, cloud infrastructure and entitlement management. You hit on the cloud as one of the things that's driving a number of identities, and how do organizations handle the entitlements as it relates to their cloud infrastructure and their workloads as they migrate to the cloud, that kind of thing. So there's just a lot of content out on our website, and advice and best practices and frameworks that people can tap into and use to advise their security strategy. I think the other thing that I wanted to point out too is that there's a lot of organizations that have frameworks, and so NIST, for example, the 800-207 Zero Trust special publication, and then the other frameworks that are out there. And our role is really, we see it as making sure that identity has its rightful place in those frameworks, right? So a lot of times they're not focused on the identity side and around the security controls within those frameworks. So, we don't want to say that our way is the best. We want to just say, hey, whatever framework you're using, you need to make sure that identity is represented accurately given the state of the threat environment out there.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned I believe you said that you have like 30 vendor members. One of the things I really like about an organization like this and a setup like this is that collaboration between competitors. And I think I think you see it in I think a lot of industries have some version of that. Of obviously they want to compete, but it's like, well, we can compete on these areas, but there's a vested interest kind of for the common good that we sort of work together and try to solve these big problems. So rather than having 30 vendors come up with 30 separate solutions that are all kind of conflicting or whatever, which maybe they still do on some level, but it's nice to have that cooperation, or at least have an open discussion about, well, what is the best way to solve this problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for us, it's more about the what and the why, and then let the vendors sort of hash out the details about the how. because I think there's lots of different ways to approach some of these outcomes. So the outcomes are really focused kind of on the what and why, and then there's approaches that are the how, but it's much more about the capabilities that you need to address those particular outcomes, and less about use this vendor with that vendor, or maybe it's a single platform, maybe it's a best of breed approach. I mean, those implementation decisions should be made, based on your particular situation. But we want to make customers, or help make customers, smarter about this whole area, and so then they know what to ask their vendors in the conversation that they have with their vendors about their particular solution. So that's really what we're trying to do at the highest level, sort of educate in a very vendor neutral way about how they should go about protecting their digital identities.
Okay. This kind of falls under both visibility and identity, but if I look at, like, from what I've seen in terms of the sort of forensic post-mortem on the Colonial Pipeline attack last year, it was this zombie VPN account that they got the credentials for and were able to get in. So it's like, all right, well, there's a visibility element there of, well, why didn't you know this VPN account was there? And then there's the identity element of, well, why did you let this, someone else impersonate this identity? It would be interesting, I think, and maybe this research is out there, to try to kind of peel back a lot of attacks and say, okay, well, at its core, was this a function of identity or visibility or whatever? Like, what really was the thing that allowed to get it? I mean, because the attackers have, you got your 0-day exploits, you've got, just exploits in general. Sometimes vulnerabilities help you out with things like log4j, just kind of open the door and say, hey, right. But to kind of go back and look and say, okay, yes, but in all of these cases, if you had a better approach to identity management, would it have stopped it? Would it have slowed it down? Would it have helped you detect it?
Yeah. So, again, back to the research that we've done, we did a report, I guess it was about a year ago, where we actually asked the stakeholders in identity. So, human resources, you kind of think about, where does an identity start and what's the evolution of identity? It's with HR. So an employee joins an organization, maybe they transition to another job, and then they eventually exit. And HR was one. We asked some sales leadership, because the data that they're dealing with is pretty sensitive data. We asked the IT help desk. So, kind of a different take on research. And what we found was 34% of organizations remove access on the day that an employee leaves the organization. So that kind of speaks directly to the problem that created the Colonial Pipeline hack. Had that person been deprovisioned from every application or every system that they had access to on the day they left, that credential wouldn't have been floating around. And then there's the other research that we do on an annual basis, and which is the 2021 Trends Report, which you'll see our 2022 will come out probably early June. But we're kind of tracking digital identity, the identity-related attacks. How could they have prevented? Where are companies investing? What are organizations doing internally around ownership of identity security? Is it a part of the security organization, or is it a separate organization? And so in those trends reports, we're asking specifically organizations the types of identity related attacks and what could have prevented them. And I think certainly in the case of the Colonial Pipeline, having MFA at least would have slowed down the attacker. Maybe they would have figured out a way to intercept, depending on the mechanism being used for MFA. But I think it's about, and one of our other customer advisory board members, Clint Maples, who's the CISO of Robert Half, talks about how it's just about slowing them down. And maybe they'll get bored. If they can't get in, if it's not easy, they'll move on to another target. So I think there's definitely, there's more general research out there that can point to how can some of these attacks be prevented or certainly reduced.
Well, and I think that that idea of slowing down is, that's been true from the very earliest days of cybersecurity. I mean, back, even in the early 2000s, when as Wi-Fi was becoming mainstream, and it all of a sudden it came out that the web encryption was easily crackable, and there were tools to do it in like under a minute, and and so people were like, well, you have to upgrade to WPA ASAP. You need to do all these things because now your thing is easily crackable, and and WEP is useless. And I was still making the case where I'm like, okay, but still use it, because the reality is, if someone's doing war driving down my street looking for networks, I'm sure they can find someone on my street who just has an open network. So they're not going to bother with mine. Even if you just had the weapon, why would they bother? So it's just any even tiny roadblock you can put in the way is something, because most attackers are lazy. Most attackers they're going to follow the path of least resistance, and so as long as you've got something, there's a good chance they're just going to go look for the next thing. Yeah,
totally agree with that.
But to your point about the removing of credentials when someone leaves, I mean, I feel like the last couple companies I've left have been pretty good about it. But and I don't remember if I told you this when we spoke previously, but there's a company that I have not done work with for 8 going on 9 years now, that I still have an email alias. I still, like, on a weekly basis receive emails. And not to say that gives me, it doesn't necessarily give me access to their network, but it's just an example of sort of sloppy hygiene. It's an example of, if that email address exists, maybe I do have access to the network. I've never tried. So who knows?
Yeah. Well, and I think the thing, so I've been in this space since 2008. So I've been in this space for about 14 years. And it's interesting to me, and my background is I came into Ping Identity in 2008. And so back then we were talking about the same things that we're talking about today. I think that's the thing that's really interesting to me. And maybe it's the case across other security domains, but the organizations are still struggling with the same challenges they had 14 years ago. We were talking about deprovisioning of accounts back then. We were talking about adoption of cloud and how that was going to create problems for identity management, more identities, and more that needed to be protected and secured. And it's just interesting that you fast forward 14 years, and some of the attacks that have happened in the last couple of years are just because of poor hygiene, right? To your point, weak passwords, shared passwords, a lack of MFA, a lack of deprovisioning of accounts when people leave the organization. So it's just still the same best practices that existed 14 years ago that are causing the problems that we're having today. So and maybe it's because organizations are siloed. Security and identities maybe in the past been more of an operational type function and less of a security function. And so that's, I would say those are the reasons the IDSA exists. How do we educate security professionals about good identity hygiene and making sure that they're putting in place best practices to prevent these easily preventable identity related attacks?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I forget what I was going to say about that, but oh, I know what I was going to say. I was going to say that I think that the point you just made is universally true across cybersecurity, which is those like foundational best practices are just like they're immutable. Like like you have to start there. And I think a lot of times organizations are like, oh well, what's the cool new thing? There's should we do deception technology? I mean, I'm not going to lump zero trust in or whatever. But there's always a new vendor with a new thing, and and it's easy to say, oh well, probably the cool new innovative thing is the best solution. And my take is, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any of those solutions. Maybe they're great, but before you invest the money, before you do that, you have to do the basics.
Yep. Yeah, very definitely. And I think sometimes the vendors do a disservice to the broader industry in that they do sort of flash the shiny object, and that gets everybody's attention when at the end of the day the basic stuff isn't there to build off of.
Right. And like I said, it's been a number of years since I've written about this specifically, but there's that sort of Pareto principle, 80-20 rule to the whole thing of, if you just did these 10 hygiene best practices, you would eliminate 80% of your problems. Now you can go look for tools to fix that last 20%, but right. If you just did this, 80% of your security challenge would be solved.
Absolutely, yeah.
When I was looking on the IDS website and looking at Identity Management Day, there's also this thing about there's I guess two things I have questions on. One is become an identity management champion, and the other is nominate an individual or organization for an identity management award. So I was curious if you could talk about either of those, and are those things that people can still do, or is it too late for April 12th at this point?
Yeah, so the champions, that is essentially people who have signed up to help us spread the word, who are passionate about this particular topic and want to be recognized. And so absolutely people can still sign up as champions until April 12th or even after, actually year round. The awards actually closed yesterday. So yesterday being March 31st, but we will be announcing the award winners at the April 12th virtual conference that I mentioned earlier. But next year, for sure, there's an opportunity to submit. And what we want to do there is recognize organizations that are doing innovative things, and maybe even it just comes back to solid best practices, but are putting identity at the center of their security strategy. So we've got a couple of different awards that we'll give away. One is for Enterprise Project of the Year, one's for SMB Project of the Year, also Zero Trust based initiative within an organization, and then leader. So someone who within their organization who is really driving an identity-centric security strategy. So tune in April 12th for those award winners for sure. There's one other thing, actually, Tony, and I don't know if you noticed it on the website, but there is an opportunity to give back to the cybersecurity community and help the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. So we've this year created what we call the Next Generation Fund, and hoping that the community will contribute to this fund, which will then, the proceeds of that will be given to an organization called Perscalis, which is all about providing free cybersecurity training for individuals who are trying to make a career transition, and individuals who may not have access to tech jobs. So it's very much about underserved populations. to try and help elevate those individuals. And then the other side of it is that Perscalis partners with organizations in those communities to provide kind of a talent pipeline. So people come out of this 12-week training program with cybersecurity skills and a CompTIA certification, and then have an opportunity to get jobs within their community through organizations that are hungry for cybersecurity professionals. And the reason we wanted to do this is obviously we want to give back, but we also want to highlight the importance of the next gen security professional needs to be identity smart. This whole topic, right? So that's sort of the main driver behind that. But there is an opportunity to donate, and hopefully we can raise some money to help with the next generation of cybersecurity professionals.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. I will say one of the things I think has improved greatly, and there's still obviously issues, but one of the things that has improved greatly in the last 10 years, maybe 15 years, is I think the cybersecurity community has gotten way more welcoming. I feel like, again, going back to sort of, dating myself and going back to the early 2000s, I feel like it was much more cliquey, like if you weren't in, and there was always this sort of like hazing of the newbies, and basically you had to kind of fight for your place at the table. And I feel like a lot of the people who are more visible and respected in the cybersecurity industry have changed that narrative. I look at people like Jack Daniel or Marcus Carey and how they kind of do everything they can to help people and invite them in, but just the industry as a whole, I think, has done a better job of trying to be welcoming, and I personally I do feel like that is simply cultural, or it's altruistic. It isn't purely a response to the sort of cybersecurity skills gap. It wasn't like oh, we don't have enough people, we better start being nice.
Right. That was my first thought was, it's more out of necessity than anything, right? But yeah, no, it's this organization is really interesting. One of my vendor companies introduced me to them, and super excited to be partnering with them.
Well, let's see, what else can we talk about? A lot of times on the podcast, I will I will digress. But I haven't done it as much in the COVID era, because usually it was like, oh, well, I just went and saw the latest Avengers movie or whatever. And now I'm still like, I'm waiting for it to hit Netflix or whatever. So
right.
I know things have improved. People are going to theaters. I am not yet. It's sort of it. I'm looking at May, because in May, the new Doctor Strange movie comes out, and the new Top Gun movie comes out, and I think right around then the new Jurassic World comes out. So there'll be three movies, and around that Memorial Day time frame, where I'm like, okay, but I really should see that in a theater.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're all sort of on the Netflix circuit. So I've had a couple of conversations with friends recently about, there's 3 that I've seen, and there's probably more, documentaries, docudramas that kind of hit on this idea of trust in some way. So I don't know if you've paid attention. There was a docuseries about, or docudrama, I guess, called Inventing Anna, which is about a fake German heiress, right? Who basically just, worked her way through New York based on a very sketchy foundation, I suppose is the way to say it. And then Tinder Swindler is another one that's pretty popular, and Bad Vegan is another one. And so it's just interesting that all of a sudden there seems to be this genre that's all about trusting too much, and people portraying themselves in a way that's not accurate at all. And it's kind of interesting. I wonder why there's been such a flurry of these kind of.
Well, and it's I believe the phrase is actually art imitates life. Whatever it is, it's life imitating art, because when I see things like that, I think, okay, well, actually, no, it was life in the first place. You look at like, Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah.
But the one I was thinking of at first was Pacific Heights. I don't know if you remember that movie with Michael Keaton.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a psychological thriller, but where he was, but he social engineered his way into renting this duplex, and it was just there's just evidence of those kind of things. But my wife and I watched Inventing Anna. That was a good one. I'm familiar with the other two, but I haven't watched them yet. I think my wife is watching the Bad Vegan one. But yeah, the Inventing Anna one, it's mind blowing to me. Like if I as an actual person, not committing fraud, walk into a bank and say, hey, I'd like to borrow some money. Could you give me $20 million? The answer very quickly is going to be no.
Right.
And yet somehow she was able to get within, this close to getting, investment banks to just hand her $20 million based on social engineering. I'm like, that's mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I bring it up because it's been interesting to watch them, because it ties back to identity in a way, right? This idea of trust and impersonation, and, there's some parallels I think that can be made there, but, yeah, that's been the interesting topic lately is, gosh, can you trust anybody anymore based on those, obviously? But yeah, it's kind of just interesting stuff for sure.
Only semi-related note, but I just recently finished reading the book Active Measures by Thomas Rid, and the book is about disinformation campaigns. It goes through like the history of like KGB, CIA operations, and he's done his homework, has all the research, has interviewed key players, which also is fascinating to me. I was like, because he's talking about like, disinformation campaigns the KGB ran in like 1940, and yet was able to, different people have defected over the years, and he was able to interview, ex-KGB agents who were actively involved, and so it's very interesting. But my net takeaway at the end of this book was, I don't know if you can believe anything, because in a lot of cases, like, both the CIA and the KGB, or more broadly, both USA and Russia, or even other nations, use legitimate activists and companies to further their narrative. So sometimes what looks like a legitimate message is, and sometimes what looks like a legitimate message, has like a little hint of a lie in it, but 95% of it's true. And it's just very tricky. So after going through this book, I'm like, yeah, you just don't know.
Yeah.
So
interesting world we live in, isn't it? It
is. All right. Well, I want to, I guess, kind of wind things up. But if there's anything like last thoughts you have, and again, Identity Management Day, April 12th. I will include the link, with this podcast, so that people can, go register, make sure they attend that, and also just go to the IDSalliance.org website and just check out all of the other resources. So all of that will be in there. But if you have any other parting thoughts, any questions I didn't ask.
No, I just want to thank you for having me. I guess just the last thing I would say is, I hope you'll join the conference on the 12th of April. We have, like I said, a great lineup of sessions that I think are going to be incredibly informative, and the speakers are amazing. And so I want to thank all of them for agreeing to participate in the conference. But yeah, join us April 12th. It'll be a great day.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow at TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.